Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Transport Topics webinar. My name is Christy Raymond, and I am the Vice President of Sales for Transport Topics. I will also be serving as your moderator for today's program. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today. We're going to provide you with some information that you can use in your own business operations. That's the general mission of Transport Topics, and that's what we strive for in our informative webinar series. The title of today's webinar is OTIF, or On Time in Full, and FSMA, what shippers want to know and how 3PLs can deliver, sponsored by MacroPoint. Our speakers today are Dave Helsema, Executive Vice President from MacroPoint, Matt Perry, Senior Vice President of Werners Logistics, and Robert Nathan, co-founder and CEO of Load Delivered. Dave Helsema serves as Executive Vice President of MacroPoint, bringing in over 30 years of sales and leadership, including roles as VP of Sales Operations at Total Quality Logistics, as well as senior level roles at the Hearst Corporation and AT&T today. Today, Dave helps MacroPoint be the market leader in complete transportation visibility. Matt Perry, Senior Vice President of Werners Logistics, a key component of the company's portfolio of transportation service solutions. Matt is responsible for all of Werners Enterprises' fully developed intermodal, brokerage, freight management, and global portfolio service offerings, operation in over 150 countries. He began his career at Werners in 1999 as the Director of Operations for Dedicated Services. Robert Nathan is co-founder and CEO of Load Delivered. Under Nathan's leadership, Load Delivered has evolved from logistics startup to well-oiled operational machine. The company is built on 5 pillars: a deep network of Tier 1 carriers, a high-growth potential customer portfolio, world-class technology, a talented team of experts, and a brand that's recognized by industry peers. We will turn the program over to our speakers in just a moment, but first a few housekeeping items. I'd like to let everyone know that if you're experiencing any technical difficulties with either the audio or video portions of this program, you can call the following number for assistance: 800-785-5623. Again, for technical assistance, that number is 800-785-5623. Also, here's a brief overview of how our program will work today. We have our speakers, Dave, Matt, and Robert, who will be presenting some information, and everyone can follow along via the slide presentation on the screen. While this is taking place, audience members can submit questions for our speakers. At the top of the screen, on the right-hand side, there's an icon labeled Questions. When you click on it, a box will pop up on your screen. Type your question in the box, click the word Send, and your question will be submitted. After our speakers have completed their presentation, we'll have a question and answer session, and we'll do our very best to answer all of your questions. Please remember that you can ask your questions at any point in time during the program. Now, before we bring in our speakers today, I'd like to set the stage. With new stricter OTIF, or on-time in full standards, being imposed by some of the largest retailers and the Food Safety Modernization Act, known as FSMA, shippers are requiring real-time visibility now more than ever. To win and keep their business, it is crucial for your team to deliver on these increased expectations. Join our panel of 3PL experts as we discuss exactly what today's shippers are looking for and how you can exceed their expectations. So let's get started, and with no further ado, I'd like to hand the presentation over to Dave Helsema from MacroPoint. Dave, take it away.
Thank you, Christy, so very much. I know I can speak for Matt and Robbie to say we'd like to thank everybody who's attended today. These are great topics that I think are going to be ripe for some great discussion. And to give you an idea of kind of how we've approached this, is we're really going to give Matt and Robbie the ability to talk about how they're dealing with these two seemingly different types of challenges that they'll be facing within their organization, and hopefully be able to give you some actionable items to walk away from. But before we begin, I do want to send out, I think I can speak for everybody that's on this call, our thoughts and prayers for the families that are affected by the 2 hurricanes that have hit the 2 parts of our country, the folks who are suffering from many of the fires in the Northwest. And I can probably speak for a lot of people on these calls, because on this call today, we had many people from the retailer section, the shipper section, the asset-based carrier, the 3PL, and the broker, and how all of these people have banded together to make sure that we can help those in need. So our hats off to everybody who is helping those in need as well. So to dig into a little bit deeper today what we're doing, like I said, our topics are very hot right now for very different reasons. One is driven by customer demand, and the other is driven by regulation. The new OTIF standards and FSMA regulations are impacting the logistics industry heavily, and both are happening at nearly the same time. Retailers and shippers are wanting their providers to perform better than ever before, and the consequences for all can amount to huge monetary fines to loss of business. I'm pleased to bring together 2 industry experts who deal with these issues on a daily basis. They're going to share their thoughts, ideas, and insight on how they navigate the increasingly complex supply chain. We're going to start with the impact of the increasingly strict standards that are the OTIF, on time and full. Many top-level retailers are enforcing these more stringent standards to meet their customers' demands of having the products they want at the time they want them. To accomplish this, the retailers need to be more nimble in how they supply these products to their customers. Keeping costs down and working in the just-in-time supply mentality is driving these decisions. Some would call it the Amazon effect, but I believe technology is what is driving how the customer thinks and the way they're wanting their products. Let's start with our panel and see how they're working with these increased demands. So I'm going to start the first question out to Robbie. Robbie, what are you seeing as far as the demands by shippers with the stricter OTIF standards? Specifically, if you want to get into it, how many shippers and receivers are applying those standards?
Well, I think it's important first and foremost to commend everyone on this call. I think part of the great component of supply chain is the desire to learn and to share information, and hopefully we can provide some valuable perspective today. In terms of what we're seeing, I think it's important to take a step back and understand, why is OTIF coming into place? Why do major retailers need this type of visibility, and why do they need this type of compliance? And I believe that the fundamental, the root cause of wanting this type of compliance is, how do you compete in a world of e-commerce? How do you compete against companies like Amazon? And as you mentioned, Dave, you do so by having just-in-time inventory levels and by creating shorter windows, so you have to store goods for less amount of time. So I think fundamentally why we're seeing shippers and retailers demand different sorts of compliance is rooted in sort of just reaction to the overall evolution of e-commerce. In terms of what we're seeing, we are seeing some challenges. We try to listen to carriers, we try to listen to manufacturers, and we try to listen to retailers. And our role in the logistics community is to sort of listen, learn, and then try to organize both our carriers' needs with shippers' demands and make sure that it's compliant with the actual retailer's delivery windows. So those are some of our goals and thoughts. What we are seeing is 4-day to 2-day windows. We're seeing 2 to 12-day grace periods now turn into arriving on a single date, and we're seeing some different penalties. So I believe that as a community we can all sort of learn, listen, and then figure out how to react together.
Yeah. Hey, Matt, I'll ask you, do you have any follow-up kind of with that same question on what you're dealing with over at Werner?
Yeah, I appreciate it. I'll start by thank you, Transport Topics and MacroPoint. for creating an opportunity for both Robbie with Loads Delivered and myself, Werner Logistics, to share our insight about this changing landscape. To Robbie's point, one of the best things about supply chain and logistics is that benchmarking and information sharing that exists in our industry. I also want to thank the several hundred that have joined us today to spend their precious time or invest it with us. On Time in Full, from our perspective, isn't a new supply chain initiative, nor is it unique to a specific customer. Many retailers have been challenging their 3PLs, vendors, manufacturers, and carriers to drive reliability in their supply chain for years. That said, the standards, expectations, and ramifications are being raised significantly. The primary focus of, from our perspective, is really an inventory management driver. The initiative is to maximize the in-stocks, minimize overstock, and allow them to deploy cash in a different mechanism. Retail for Werner is our largest segment, so we monitor closely what's going on the trends in the retail industry. One of the trends we watch is inventory to sales ratios. And while over the last 10 years that's fluctuated relatively dramatically, driven by economic change and most recently by the explosion of e-commerce, in the second quarter of this year, 11 of the top 15 retailers we work with saw inventory to sales declining. While the economy is strong and pushing that, I think the other driver to this is that just-in-time mentality, reinforcing the low inventory levels.
So, one of the things for those of you that are on the call that may not know, Werner obviously has two sides of their business, if we put it in broad terms. The asset-based carrier side of the business, as well as a thriving non-asset 3PL. Matt, what are the different challenges that are faced based upon having the dedicated assets that you have as compared to the 3PL, and how do you treat those differently, if you have to at all, or how are you approaching it differently?
Yeah. Thanks, Dave. That's a good question. When I reference Werner, we do play a lot of different roles in the supply chain. We're the 3PL in the retail space, and we're a carrier for many of the large retailers. I think what we see as the primary role for the 3PL in this space is high-quality service has never been more valuable. Visibility of the supply chain is critical to deliver on those expectations. And those are really enabled by a strong provider selection and management program. So as a 3PL, I think having a formal carrier strategy, knowing how you're going to approach the carrier market, being true to that carrier strategy, having a robust scorecard program and clear expectations, and then having a long-term view versus a short-term view are the roles that we play when we're the 3PL. As a carrier, many of those same roles are important. Investing to make sure that the service product we deliver to our company or to our customers is the core of who Werner Enterprises is as a motor carrier, and they are investing back in to have the best equipment and drivers in order to enable that.
Yeah, it seems to be kind of an ever-evolving thought process. Now, Robbie, you deal in the non-asset-based 3PL, and dealing with you talked about one of your 5 pillars being an outstanding Tier 1 carrier base. How are you engaging with those carriers with these tighter standards that you've seen, and how are you ensuring that you're continuing to educate them or get them better at what they do so they can meet the customer's expectations?
Well, we try to set up our carriers for success. I think there's a lot of companies out there, there's a segment of organizations that don't set up their carriers for success. And we spend a lot of time on the front end prior to actually talking to driver and giving him load information, is understanding his hours, how many hours he has to drive, what type of traffic he'll encounter, what type of delivery window that the receiver is going to provide for us. So I'd say part of selecting a Tier 1 carrier is communicating to that carrier and giving that carrier all the information necessary, and then giving that driver all that information necessary to hit an on-time pickup and delivery. So that's what we try to do on the front end of the business. And we think that's part of, our name might be load delivered, but it starts well before the load's even picked up.
And I guess just to add to that, Dave, I think, the process starts, as Robbie comments, the process starts at, understanding the dynamics of the shipment expectations, the consignee and delivery expectations, and challenging where inefficiencies exist so that the carriers can be successful. Because throughput and efficiency is critical as these standards get raised. The transit schedules and those are the difference between setting any provider up for success or failure.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think, Matt, you brought up earlier, both of you had brought up that on time and full standards are not something that's new. It's something that's been increasing. I think the one company that kind of brought it to the forefront recently is when Walmart put in those new standards, and one of the things that we just got a question that I'm going to kind of refer to. It's from somebody who says, what are you hearing going into 2018 as potential penalties associated with deliveries outside the respective windows for large retailers? Now, the customer the question kind of talks a little bit about Walmart, but are you seeing the penalties from retailers? Are you seeing that ramping up and increasing, or is this more of a kind of a Walmart thought process as far as fines? Either one of you would like to take that.
Well, I'll start, I guess, and I'm sure Robbie's got a perspective as well. But as a carrier, we have not been involved in discussions with, any of the large retailers about that fine coming back to the motor carrier. It's certainly set up as a vendor or a provider fine today. Obviously, that may evolve over time, but as where it stands today, that's what we look at. As a 3PL, I can tell you we don't administer any financial penalties in our current relationships, nor do we expect to or plan to put those in the near term. I think it goes back to, from our perspective, we want to, approach this with finding the right carrier, understanding how it needs to be executed for success, defining what success looks like, enabling that carrier to execute it, and when they're not, be rigid and direct about improvements or replacement. That's how we're approaching it today as a 3PL.
Okay. To follow up with Matt, we fundamentally agree with Werners' philosophy in how you treat and interact with carriers. And load delivered, we do not pass those fines down, and we typically, the majority of our customers are Fortune 500s, and we have not seen any penalties hit us. At the same time, we have conversations with supply chain executives at all of our big customers about what Load Delivered can do as an organization to mitigate these fines, to reduce these fines. And if we do see that there's going to be a challenge, to communicate the challenge or a missed appointment prior to. And I think that visibility features like MacroPoint really enable organizations like Load Delivered or Werner to communicate some of those missed deliveries potentially.
Yeah, I think one of the things that somebody shared with me a couple weeks ago is that there may be charges for rebooking appointments, but that pales in comparison to how it could impact if you didn't know a load showed up and you had to then reset an appointment outside of the window that's set up for the standard. So, you know, I think those fines are ones that we see ongoing. And so from what I get out of this is I get how you're treating your carriers, and that's awesome, and the people who move the freight. So are the shippers the one who are, you know, and some of this is fairly new. The shippers, are they the ones that you see are absorbing those potential costs as compared to the logistics service providers that are moving it for them at this point?
Dave, yes, that is absolutely what we're seeing. If, for instance, there's 1,000 shipments from a manufacturer into a retailer, and they deliver 980 on time and 20 not on time, that is the shipper that is going to take any penalties associated with that. Now, if Load Delivered or a company was responsible for routing all 1,000 of those shipments, perhaps it might be a different discussion. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess then I don't think this is a phenomenon that we see going away. I think the way you both brought up the thought about the consumer is the one who's defining what they want and when they want it. And as this continues, I'm sure that it's going to come further across the logistics supply chain. How do you see that impacting the capacity that's out there and how you meet those needs? What do you see as the roadblocks or the things that could impact the business down the road? I know I'm asking you to look at a crystal ball a little bit, but I'd be curious what you think about that, Matt.
Yeah, I think, I don't want to make it overly simple, but I think high-quality 3PLs, high-quality carriers, providers, they're going to grow at the expense of those that can't perform. Supply chain visibility, the fluidity, and the nature of every point and click, everybody wanting something next day or today is raising the expectation, raising the bar on everyone. And the providers, whichever role you play, that can deliver on those expectations have great opportunity. Adding cost into the system, whether it's back to the shipper or passed on to the carrier, isn't the right long-term answer, and that's not going to make anyone's business healthy long-term. So, you know, that may be a short-term lever that gets put into place for a particular shipper, but over time that shipper is going to have to change behavior in order to be able to achieve and drive, or cost to serve is going to prohibit them from going forward.
Okay.
Yeah, well said, Matt. We're seeing sort of, you know, similar to Matt, there's this convergence between regulatory changes with ELD coming up, and as well as more stringent guidelines on delivery policies. So when you talk about the convergence of regulatory as well as the convergence of consumer and retail and customer demand, those converging, and again, I don't have the crystal ball, but I would say that the logistics and asset-based companies that are positioned well and have been running on ELDs for 20 years and have been running compliant on the logistics and brokerage side, those are the companies that are going to really be well positioned, and let's call it this next phase of regulatory pressure combined with increased customer demand.
Okay, outstanding.
I'm not sure I could have said that better myself, Robbie.
Thank you.
I couldn't have said it better if I'd have said that better. So I'm going to switch gears now, but one of the things I want to, hey, anybody who's listening in, of the participants, if you do have any questions, remember you can go to that Q&A and type it in, and we'll make sure we try to get to those as we're talking. I think it really adds to the session as well. So I'm gonna take a couple minutes and talk about FSMA. And it's the reason why, even though they're not two topics that kind of meld together, they're both kind of happening at the same time. And I think it's one that has a lot of folks that are asking questions. And as the three of us were deciding what we wanted to talk about, we said, let's try to provide some information, things that people are out there wanting to understand. And I will tell you, as far as FSMA goes, I think there's still a lot to learn from a lot of folks in it. And it's the FSMA standards are in place, but even though the enforcement of the new act is rolling out in stages starting early next year, most companies are spending time now to ensure that they meet those new standards. As I spoke with people in the industry and I've heard people talk about it, I think there were three main topic areas that I heard and what folks have talked about. And if people are spending time in these three areas, it's really getting them off on the right foot. And number one is set the standard and educate. And that educate is internal and external, so that everybody understands what is happening in the new act and putting it in terms with the people that they deal with on both sides of them in the supply chain. I think number two is absolutely, without question, great record keeping. And I think the third part of it is folks are working on proactive solutions on what to do when an issue arises. So to get a little bit of insight on this, I think I'm going to start with Robbie. You deal, I know at Load Delivered, you deal heavily in this area. So I want to know, what are you doing to make sure that you are meeting the new standards as you work with your customers right now?
So similar to OTIF, these might be new regulatory standards, but this was basic business process, basic standard operating procedure for Load Delivered, specifically because we operate in the food supply chain. So the majority of our customers are food supply chain or packaging going into the food supply chain. In addition, we do a lot of temperature controlled. So when you look at FSMA and you look at what does it actually mean, what is this regulatory environment going to look like, the basic premise is they're trying to protect the food that the people of this great country eat every day. So whether it's your children, whether it's your colleagues, whether it's your wife or husband, we are trying to increase compliance standards in food and safety so that there are less and we can prevent foodborne illnesses like we've all seen in the news. So I think fundamentally that is a positive for everyone. When you look at what needs to be done, these again are basic standard operating procedure. Make sure you get a driver washout. If you've hauled a load of meat and you're hauling a different type of product, make sure you get a washout. What does a company like Load Delivered do? We'll even pay for that driver's washout. We won't charge the customer, but we believe it's our obligation to make sure that that trailer is clean. What else do? We look at temperature. We look at the temperature danger zones, not just about when a truck is being carrying temperature controlled product, but what happens before the product is loaded on the truck. So that 20 minutes in between the product being staged and the product going in that truck, where's the temperature at during that period of time? So I think from a temperature control, there's a lot we can do proactively. From a cleanliness, there's a lot we can do proactively. And then to your point, Dave, it's about better, whether you want to call it record keeping or, you know, the use of data and visibility to create better compliance. There's this concept of blockchain in the food supply chain that is starting to evolve. We've been spending a lot of time researching and investigating how blockchain technology can help us as we navigate through FSMA. But big picture, Dave, we're all learning, and not just the LSPs and trucking companies, but I believe that the shippers are still in the process of learning as well.
Yeah. You know, Matt, I know you kind of deal in I'd get your thoughts on what you're seeing as well.
Yeah,
I look different in each of your business units.
All right, I'll take that one. I think you framed it up great from an opening standpoint. Educate is clearly, from our perspective, number one. That education process, you know, is to our shipper partners, whether we're playing a role as the 3PL, and we are trying to make sure that we're communicating within that shipper's team, carriers, receivers, and then all the direct and indirect people that touch the equipment, you know, maintenance and those aspects of it. Education is job one. Second, I think Robbie began to touch on it, the automation, the leverage of technology. Whether that's the automation of, you know, alerts and notifications within your TMS application, whether that is the complete visibility from farm to table, whether that's, you know, the temperature management with the most modern technology of the reefer units in the equipment. As a carrier, you know, one of the things that it's, you know, triggered or certainly spurred us is to make sure that we are reinvesting in, you know, state-of-the-art, the best equipment out there on the roads, so that equipment temperature tolerance, those key components are under control and in the best position. And I think one of the unique things with Werner is just given our financial position, the ability to leverage that financial position to have state-of-the-art, the best equipment out there as we grow. Still not a large part of our business, certainly not as large as Robbie's business, but certainly an evolving and growing part of our business that we want to make sure we're on the forefront.
Yeah, I you know, it's interesting when our customers are coming to us and asking us what products and services do we have. You know, I think it's just one of the other aspects of what our customers are asking of us. I think you brought the blockchain, the big data, and it's one of the services that our customers are asking us at the same time, whether they're large or small. I think the ability to have those tools to analyze better helps in all of that, and to be able to react quicker, I think, are huge. You know, it's interesting. I was going to spend a little bit more time on this, but I think it's all coming out, and I think what we're talking about, there's lots of great resources out there to help folks, but I want to transition to something that really kind of feels like the 800-pound gorilla in the room. And the reason why I say that is because, you know, we talk about we have new standards for the customer bringing on time in full and what their requirements are and the just-in-time and all of that, and the regulation for the Food Safety Modernization Act. All of these things are coming in place along with our customers beyond those who are requiring more and more and more from their logistics service providers, and they want everything yesterday. I just Bob Boltman from TIA just recently shared that the expectation of customers, 33% of them are expecting to be able to change the delivery point of a product they ordered after they ordered it. That's where this market's going. But I think the one thing that keeps gnawing on me is there's another mandate that's taking place December of this year, and it's the new ELD mandate. And we don't know what we don't know, but I'd like to get your feedback from the two of you about how you feel this mandate potentially could impact capacity and how that's going to impact all these standards that our customers are asking of us. So, Matt, I'm going to pass it to you first. Sorry if I pulled this one out on you, but I think it's important.
No, I absolutely, on the backdrop of raising expectations, whether it's, you know, in the FSMA or in OTIF, you've got, you know, on the other side of it, you know, regulation that, you know, is impacting or can impact that available capacity. So I think it absolutely ties together. I guess I need to start with, you know, a bit of a history lesson on Werner Enterprises. You know, our position on electronic logging, we were the first adopter, the first approved motor carrier to use ELDs and have used them for, you know, 20 years. So we are absolutely proponents and believers that leveraging technology to manage hours of service is the right solution. And so we welcome the mandate in December. There's been a lot of noise, you know, over this 2-year period about, you know, repeal, about you know, enforcement, about delay. I guess our starting point would be that we strongly believe in December the mandate will go into effect. Carriers will be responsible to adhere to that standard. And while the out-of-service delay that was recently in the news was a bit topical or a bit of a hot subject at the time, the reality is it didn't really relieve or change anything. Carriers, drivers are still going to be ticketed if they're not in compliance at the scales. The difference is they may not be shut down. And I say may being, you know, local law enforcement is who is going to be enforcing this, and we know today that varies from state to state. So I absolutely think it's going to be an impact. We recognize that we're, you know, inside or right at 90 days from the time of going into effect, and by all accounts, a very, very large percentage of the carrier base in America still doesn't have ELDs in place. So this is going to be a significant impact as we close out 17 and go into 18.
Yeah, absolutely. Robbie?
We are positioning, well, I think first it's important to recognize if all of the trucking companies in the United States had implemented ELDs like Werner did 20 years ago, or were compliant like other excellent trucking companies like CR England, then there'd be zero impact on capacity. The reality is the majority of the carriers haven't installed ELDs, and if they have, they still might not be fully compliant. So the question to us is, what percentage of our carrier network still needs to become ELD compliant? And the reality is we try using carriers that do run, and we work with carriers that are compliant and do have ELDs and do provide us visibility. So I think we as an organization won't see as much of a capacity impact because we've been managing it proactively. I think industry-wide, we will see an impact. And we will see an impact. It might only be a 3 or 4% decrease in capacity, even if it's 2 or 3. But if we see GDP increase combined with more regulatory pressure, combined with more pressure from retailers to hit delivery windows, I think that those 4 factors all put together could potentially create some strong capacity challenges for the first 6 months of 2018 specifically.
Okay.
And I guess from our perspective, Dave, 3 to 5 is kind of what we would say we expect the impact would be. When we adopted, there was a larger discrepancy in the very beginning, 20 years ago. I think advancements occurred. I think there's probably going to be, less than that just on productivity within the fleets. But, we would tend to believe 3 to 5 is probably a pretty safe bet on capacity impact. And just given, the recent storms and the other dynamics, we can see how fragile the capacity network is today. So 3 to 5% is going to be meaningful.
Yeah, I totally get that. I think before the call today, we had talked about, to our friends from Transport Topics, about we have a great number of folks attending the webinar today, and I asked them what was the biggest one they ever had, and they said it was the hours of service. And we talked about how the new hours of service rules and how those stops on the weekends, plus the weather that came into play, wreaked havoc on the supply chain for 9 to 12 months. So I think having that happen with just that could happen with the ELD could put some strain on it. And I think as you work with your customers, obviously that's going to have impact as well. But thank you too for the insight on both of those. We want to make sure that we get to some questions as well. One of the things that I like to do is I don't run these things right up to the hour because I know you all have a lot to do in your work every day. So, Christy, I'll pass it back to you to see if there are some questions that have come in that we can pose to the panel.
Sure, definitely, Dave. We've got some good questions that came in while you were having your discussion. I'd like to thank all of our speakers. First of all, Dave Helsema, Executive Vice President of McElpoint, Matt Perry, Senior VP of Werner Logistics, and Robert Nathan, Co-founder and CEO of Load Delivered, and also our sponsor, McElpoint. Dave, one of the first questions that came in was, what role in capacity do we see technology as an enabler to support the new paradigm of OTIF and FSMA as shared today in the presentation?
I'll take a first stab at that, and I think it's because we deal with a lot of our customers. What I think it really does, and where visibility plays in this, in reality, is it really gives the carrier, the shipper, the end user the ability to make better decisions and to be able to make them earlier in the process. I think that is one of the keys that our shipper customers are seeing, and then also what our customers who use the service as well. So I would say that's probably the biggest parts of it, and I think as long as they are able to make those adjustments, I think that's the key.
Okay, great.
I would echo that the visibility to the problem as quickly as you can identify it enables a 3PL, a carrier, an LSP to react and impact the outcome. The lack of visibility has plagued, many in our industry for quite some time, and quite honestly, is probably a big reason why the standards are continuing to increase, is because the ramifications of not having that historically.
Okay, great. How do you think retailers are going to handle current weather catastrophes like Harvey and Irma when it comes to their OTIF standards?
That's a pretty topical question.
Whomever asked that, I think that's a great question, and I think everyone on this call is probably working collaboratively to figure that out. I think, again, open conversations, and we're dealing with a catastrophe. We're dealing with very serious challenges from an infrastructure perspective, from a capacity perspective, and we're dealing with human beings that are just, you know, walked into a facility that might have been closed for 3 or 4 days. So I think all of us are sort of trying to work together to find the answer to that question. I wish I had that answer right now.
I guess I'd only comment that I think many of the people driving, you know, OTIF and that are best-in-class retailers, and they're gonna expect best-in-class response. Does that mean there'll be more leniency in the short term on OTIF days from, you know, 2 to 3? I think that's a realistic, but I think they're still going to, you know, challenge us as 3PLs to respond better than most, and that's the expectation they placed on us, and I think we're going to have to rise to support that challenge.
Okay, great. Thank you, Matt. I think we have time for one more question that came in during the program. How have your third-party carriers been proactive in working with you? What are some of their best practices you've seen from them?
So let's kind of take this one for maybe, let's just look at OTIF, on time in full. What are some of your best practices your carriers are doing to help you meet those standards?
For us, they're complying with our visibility requests. When we, on specific products, we are very upfront and communicate that we will need them to have some sort of either ELD or mobile track apping app device in order to be able to haul this specific shipment. So that's an area that we think is very important, is if it is a just-in-time or if it's a high-visibility load, then we need actual visibility on it opposed to manual tracking.
Okay.
I think, you know, in conjunction with that, we talked a little bit earlier around, you know, a collaborative, strategic connectivity with your core partners. The partners that are supporting, you know, some of the largest retailers out there, they're oftentimes carriers that have the capabilities needed to deliver on the service expectations. So it's finding the right fits, it's creating that visibility, but it's also, you know, clear direction and understanding of the expectations. And so I think those carriers that are wanting to participate and bringing forward, you know, the capabilities and the energy and the commitment to do it, those are what the best-in-class carriers are doing.
Yeah. I think we're coming up on a time when we'd like to, you know, give you back a couple of minutes of your day to do good. I want to thank Matt and Robbie wholeheartedly for joining this. Your insight has been tremendous. It's one of the things that our customers love to hear, and it's one of the things I know about this industry is that you've got a group of people that are always willing to share because they understand as you educate across people that may be your competitor, it makes it better for everybody, and it makes the transport supply chain work stronger. One last thing I'll say, if we didn't get to your question, I promise that we will respond to them individually or as a group. There were some really good questions, but I think we've run out of time. Again, Matt and Robbie, thank you. Transport Topics, as always, thank you so very much for being a great conduit to educate the people in our industry.
Thanks, Dave. Well, we
Thank you.
are at the end of the program here today, and I would like to thank all of you who attended the program today on OTIF and FSMA, what shippers want and how 3PLs can deliver. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, MacroPoint. If you have additional questions or if you would like more information, you can please contact them with the information that's on the last slide on the screen. And if you know of someone who wanted to attend today's program but was unable to do so, or if you'd like to go back and review any or all of today's program, we'll have it available on our webinar archive page at www.ttnews.com. Thank you and have a great rest of your afternoon.